3-page report. An intricate web of data, examples, and insights proving that personal connection wasn't just nice to have, but a measurable advantage. It showed, in black and white, that genuine, human conversations had directly contributed to over $200,000 in additional revenue that year. Every chat about weekend plans, every congratulatory message about a client's child's graduation, every shared laugh about a family pet had built loyalty that no sterile, professional-only competitor could replicate. I wasn't just proud of that report. It felt like proof of my belief that empathy and authenticity could coexist with success. Why what happened next felt like betrayal disguised as policy. Quinna called a full department meeting on a cold Tuesday morning in late autumn. The tone of her email invite had been brisk, almost routine. Mandatory review. Client relationship protocols. I didn't think much of it. In fact, I walked into that meeting with a quiet sense of pride, assuming that after months of silence, she was finally ready to recognize the audit's impact on our performance. I thought she might commend the findings, maybe even use it to inspire the team. Instead, I stood there, heart thudding, as she directed me to project my audit files on the large conference screen while all 23 of my colleagues watched. The fluorescent light seemed extra harsh that morning. My cursor hovered uncertainly as I opened the files. Then, with the calm confidence of someone who had rehearsed every word, Quinna began dismantling my work line by line, page by page. She didn't acknowledge the revenue gains or the client praise. No, she called every friendly exchange, every personalized note, every conversation record a boundary breach. This is precisely the sort of inefficiency that weakens our standards, she declared, her voice crisp and cold as she scrolled. Personal chatter about hobbies or pets has no place in client communications. This, she pointed at the data glowing on the screen, represents a failure to maintain appropriate professional distance. Laughter rustled uncomfortably through the room, but no one spoke. My face burned as she turned months of careful work that had built trust and loyalty into an example of what not to do. It felt like watching a piece of my heart being paraded in front of a firing squad. Then came the moment that still replays in my mind like a slow motion nightmare. Quinna opened the master file, the one containing the entire client relationship database. Every note, every follow-up reminder, every success story. My proof that relationships, not robotic formality, had driven our growth. And as she continued talking about new efficiency standards, her hand moved toward the delete button. This entire approach, she said with a satisfied smirk, is garbage. Starting today, we return to streamlined, professional communication protocols. Then she clicked. A soft digital chime filled the silence. 53 pages vanished from the shared drive. Gone. My work, my proof, my pride deleted with one arrogant motion. The room went utterly still. You could have heard the air conditioning hum. Quinna turned from the screen, looking pleased with herself, expecting me to nod obediently and start rebuilding the department in her sterile, lifeless mold. But she had made a fatal mistake. What she didn't realize was that while she had destroyed my files, she hadn't destroyed the relationships behind them. The clients weren't data entries. They were people who still trusted me, who'd shared their stories, who called me directly because they knew I cared. Those connections lived in hearts and memories, not spreadsheets. And apparently, someone had been watching all of this far more closely than Quinna realized. Before she even finished explaining her new efficiency directives, my phone buzzed against the conference table. I glanced at the caller ID, Marlowe Partners. My pulse quickened. I excused myself quietly and stepped into the hallway, my hands trembling as I pressed the phone to my ear. Zelda, said a familiar voice on the other end. We've been watching what's happening at Petten and we need to talk. Marlowe Partners was a rising consulting firm founded by three of our most talented former colleagues, people who'd left months earlier to start something new. As they spoke, the tremor in my hand faded. Their tone was confident, deliberate. They knew exactly what Queenie had just done. We've tracked Petten's client retention for the past year, they explained. We know who's responsible for the numbers behind that growth. You. Then came the offer that made my breath catch. We're prepared to bring you on at $500,000 a year, plus equity participation. You'll have full autonomy over client relationship strategies. We believe in what you built because we believe the future of business isn't in cold professionalism. It's in personal connection. And we want you to help us shape that future. $500,000 double my current salary. A seat at the table where empathy wasn't a liability, but an advantage. Proprietary information, Frompton, they continued. But we also note that client relationships are built on trust and personal connection, not on database files. If you choose to join Usand, if clients choose to work with someone they trust rather than staying with someone who treats them like a transaction numbers, that's simply the natural consequence of different business philosophies. I understood immediately what they were suggesting. They weren't asking me to steal clients or violate any legal agreements. They were simply pointing out that if I left town and clients decided they preferred working with someone who remembered their dog's health problems and their daughter's college plans, that was their choice to make. When I walked back into the conference room, Quinla was still lecturing about professional efficiency stands, while my former co-worker stared at their hands, or notebooks, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. She noticed my return and paused her presentation. Do you have questions about our new communication procos? I looked around the room, 8 people I had worked alongside for 18 months. Then at the blank screen where my audit had been displayed before being destroyed. Then back at Quinla's expectant expression. Actually, I said, I have something to announce. What happened next would become the most satisfying moment of my professional life. But I want to save that for the next part of this story because their revenge that followed was so perfectly orchestrated by Quinla herself that you need to hear exactly how her own actions greeted the domino effect that brought down everything she thought she was protecting. The beauty of what unfolded wasn't that I planned some elaboration to hurt her or the company. The beauty was that by deleting my relationship-building work, she had just eliminated the only thing keeping her biggest clients from walking away. She thought she was deleting inefficient documentation. What she actually deleted was the foundation of customer loyalty that took a year to build and could disappear in a matter of weeks. And when me phone rang with that $500,000 offer, I realized she had just handed me the key to the most elegant revenge possible. Simply letting natural consequences unfold while she watched everything she thought she controlled slip away forever. I'm resigning from TIN Analytics effective immediately, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I'll be joining Marlowe Partners as their Director of Client Relations. The conference room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning unithumming in the background, and someone's been clicking nervously against their notepad. Quinla's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that looked almost like panic. You can't just quit in the middle of a department meeting, she stammered, clearly thrown off by the soon-expected development. There are protocols, notice requirements, transition procedures. Actually, I replied, pulling out my phone to show the contract offer I had just received. My employment agreement allows for immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment or professional misconduct. Having my work deleted in front of colleagues while being publicly humiliated qualifies on both counts. Gideon Ashworth, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Perhaps we shall discuss this privately, before making any hasty decisions. But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Quinla had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she would get to experience the consequences just as publicly. There's nothing to discuss, I said, gathering my personal items from the conference table. My decision is final. I'll submit formal resignation pack within the hour. As I walked toward the conference room exit, I could feel 23 pairs of eyes following my movement. Some of my co-workers looked shocked, others looked impressed, and a few looked like they were reconsidering their own career choices. Quinla colored after me, her voice higher than usual. You're making a huge mistake. Marlowe Partners is a startup with no proven track record. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about relationship building being more important than professional standards. I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her. We'll see which approach proves more valuable. Within 24 hours, I had cleaned out my desk, completed exit interviews, and started my new position at Marlowe Partners. Their office was smaller than Peyton's, but filled with energy and excitement about building something innovative in the consulting space. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that business relationships were built on genuine human connection, not efficiency metrics and standardized communication procos. But the real validation of my decision came in the weeks that followed. I watched the natural consequences of Queena's actions unfold with devastating precision. I hadn't reached out to any tin clients. I hadn't made sales calls or sent recruitment messages. I simply updated my professional profiles to reflect my new position and continued being the same person who had spent a year building authentic relationships with people who needed consulting advices. The first call came on Thursday morning, 3 days after I started at Marlowe Partners. Vernon Hutchcraft, the manufacturing company owner whose golden retriever I had asked about during routine check-ins, called my new office number directly. Zelda, he said, I heard through the professional network that you've moved to a new firm. I wanted to congratulate you and ask about your new company's capabilities. Wetted for an hour about his business needs, his expansion plans, and yes, his dog's improved mobility after their specialist treatment. By the end of the conversation, he had scheduled a consultation meeting to discuss transitioning his account to Marlowe Partners. The second call came that same afternoon. Constance Fairweather, whose textile company anniversary I had celebrated, wanted to discuss her upcoming project needs with someone who understood her business philosophy. I've been working with consulting firms for 12 years, she told me. And you're the first person who ever made me feel like me company mattered beyond the invoice amount. If you're offering the same personal attention at your new firm, I'm interested in making a change. By the end of my first week at Marlowe Partners, I had received calls from 6 former clients. Not because I had solicited them, but because they preferred working with someone who treated them as individuals rather than account numbers. Meanwhile, back at Analytics, Quinla was starting to realize what she had actually deleted when she destroyed my relationship hoarding documentation. I heard about the growing panic through mutual connections in the professional committee. Apparently, she had tried to reach out to major clients for routing Nikikins, only to discover that many of them were no longer interested in continuing their contracts. When shackled Vernon Hutchcraft to schedule his quarterly review, he politely informed her that he was exploring other consulting options and would not be renewing his annual agreement. When she contacted Constance Fairweather about upcoming project needs, Constance explained that she had found a consulting partner who better understood her business values. One by one, their clients I had spent a year building relationships with were making that choice to work with someone who remembered their personal details, their business challenges, and their individual communication preferences. Quinla had believed that client loyalty was tied to Peyton's brand reputation and service quality. She was discovering that client loyalty was actually tied to personal connections that made people feel valued and understood. The third week after my departure, I received a call that made everything clear about how devastating Quinn's decision had become. Brick Yates, the bookstore owner who had started calling directly, instead of going through Quinn's main number, wanted to share some information that he thought I should know. Quinla called mice today, he said, asking if there were any service issues that might explain why I was considering other consulting options. When I told her I was following you to Marlowe Partners because I valued our personal connection, she actually argued with me about it. He laughed, but not in a way that suggested he found it amusing. She told me that professional affinities should be based on service equality, not personal chit-chat about books and family. She said I was making an emotional decision instead of a business decision. Can you believe that? She was lecturing me about how I should choose my own consulting partners. That phone call revealed everything about White Quinla's approach was failing so spectacularly. Even when faced with the evidence that personal relationships were driving client decisions, she couldn't adjust the philosophy. She was still trying to convince people that efficiency metrics mattered more than feeling valued and understood. By the end of my first month at Marlowe Partners, 14 former Patton clients had either switched to our firmer-initiated conversations about potential transitions. These weren't small accounts. They represented over 60% of Patton's annual revenue. I wasn't actively recruiting them. I was simply being available when they called, remembering details about their lives. In the first place, Marlowe Partners was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections, while Patton Analytics was experiencing the worst client retention crisis in company history. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the professional success, though both were incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing that Quinla had created this entire situation herself, through her stubborn refusal to value what clients actually wanted. She could have supported my relationship-building approach. She could have learned from the improved retention rates and client satisfaction scores. She could have recognized that personal attention was generating measurable business results. Instead, she had chosen to publicly humiliate me and delete work that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in client loyalty. Apparently, believing that her efficiency-first philosophy was more important than actual evidence of what worked. 2 months after my departure, I heard through our professional networks that Gideon Ashworth had called an emergency board meeting to address the client retention crisis. Patton Analytics was facing the possibility of layoffs, reduced operations, and potentially selling to a larger firm to survive their Vainware loss. Quinla, who had been so confident about her professional stance and efficiency metrics, was now scrambling to explain how the company had lost most of its major accounts within 8 weeks. According to sources who were still working there, she had initially tried to blame my departure for the client defections, arguing that I had somehow poisoned client relationships or violated ethical standards to steal accounts. But Fettenline didn't support her accusations. Clients weren't leaving immediately after I resigned. They were leaving after attempting to maintain relationships with Quinn's new efficiency-focused approach and discovering that they preferred working with people who treated them as individuals. The board investigation of exactly what I could have told them months earlier. Clients choose consulting partners based on trust, communication quality, and feeling valued, not on how quickly their calls get processed or how efficiently their concerns get categorized. Quinla had spent a year dismissing relationship building as inefficient social hall conversation, and now she was facing the consequences of that philosophy. In the form of client defections that threatened the entire company's survival. 3 months after my departure, I received the call that made this revenge story complete. Gideon Ashworth contacted me personally to discuss what called a potential partnership opportunity. He wanted to know if Marlowe Partners would be interested in acquiring Patton Analytics, remaining client accounts, and possibly hiring some of their staff during what he described as a strategic restructuring process. A company that had considered my relationship building approach an Ephesion. Garbage was now hoping to sale their remaining assets to the firm that had been built on exactly the principles Quinlan had rejected. During a conversation, Gideon mentioned that they were also re-evaluating leadership process in their client relations department. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Quinn's position was no longer secure. I have to ask, he said toward the end of our call, what would it take to bring you back to Petone as Director of Client Relations? We're prepared to offer significant compliance increases and complete autonomy over relationship management strategies. The irony was incredible. 3 months after watching my work get deleted in front of me colleagues, I was being recruited back to implement exactly the same approach at a much higher salary, with complete authority over the department that had rejected my methods. But I had the interest in returning to work for people who had only learned to value my approach after losing millions of dollars in revenue. I appreciate the offer, I told him, but I'm very happy with my current position. Marlowe Partners understood the value of personal client relationships from day one, rather than having to learn it through crisis. 6 months after leaving Pattern Analytics, I was promoted to senior partner at Marlowe Partners with equity participation and responsibility for expanding our client relationship philosophy across multiple service lines. The clients who had followed me from Pattern became the foundation for our most successful year in company history. Meanwhile, Pattern Analytics underwent the strategic restructure that Gideon had euphemistically described. They laid off 30% of their staff, sold their largest office space, and ultimately merged with a competitor who valued efficiency metrics over personal relationships. Quinna was not retained during Themaga. I learned about her departure through LinkedIn updates and professional network conversations. According to former colleagues, she had spent her final months at Pattern trying to rebuild client relationships using the same impersonal approach that had caused the crisis. In the first place, she apparently never understood that problem wasn't her communication skills or technical knowledge. The problem was a fundamental belief that business relationships should be purely transactional. The last update I heard about her situation came from a mutual professional contact who mentioned that was having difficulty finding comparable positions because her most recent role had ended during a mild client retention crisis. Potential employers were understandably concerned about hiring someone whose management approach had contributed to such significant revenue loss, especially in client facing roles where relationship building was considered essential. I felt no pleasure in hearing about her career difficulties. My satisfaction came from knowing that the principles had mocked and rejected were not recognized throughout our industry as essential for sustainable business success. Every consulting firm wastes investing in personal client relationship strategies. Every professional development program emphasized the importance of treating clients as individuals, rather than transaction sources. Every successful consulting practice prioritized exactly the approach that Quinlan had considered defective garbage. She had been wrong about what clients valued, wrong about what drove business success, and wrong about the importance of personnel connections in professional efficiency. And her wrongness had been revealed not through elaborate schemes or calculated acts, but simply through allowing natural consequences to unfold after she chose to publicly destroy work that presented the foundation of customer loyalty. The most elegant revenge is always the kind where your enemy defeats them via their own actions, and you simply have to step aside and let their poor decisions create the destruction they deserve. Today, 2 years after watching my audit files get deleted in front of 23 colleagues, I'm running the client relations division for one of the fastest growing consulting firms in our region. Our success is built entirely on that principle that Quinlan rejected. That business relationships thrive when people feel valued, understood, and personally connected to their service providers. Every day I get to work with clients who appreciate having their birthdays remembered, their family updates acknowledged, and their business challenges addressed with genuine personal investment in their success. And every day, I'm reminded that the best revenge against people who undervalue your contributions is simply proving them wrong through your continued access elsewhere. Quinla thought she was deleting inefficient documentation hints. She destroyed my relationship holding work. What she actually deleted was the only thing preventing her professional world from collapsing. Gaunt her. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions while you build something better somewhere else. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had some of your own undervalued work that you knew was important, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes the best therapy for professional betrayalists, sharing stories with people who understand what it feels like to have your contributions dismissed by people who should know better. And if you enjoyed hearing about how deleting my files became the beginning of Quinn's professional downfall, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about workplace revenge that writes itself when you simply let incompetent managers face the consequences of their own poor judgment.